Good afternoon or good morning to you West Coasters, and welcome to Food Processing's webinar, Cybersecurity Threat Scenarios and Recommendations for Safeguarding Your Operations. I'm Dave Fusaro, editor of Food Processing Magazine. And for starters, well, if you're hearing me, you apparently have no problem with the sound. But if you are having any problems hearing or viewing today's webcast, first try to log out and log back in. If you're still having trouble, explain your problem in that Ask a Question, Request Technical Support box, which should be at the bottom of your screen, and one of our IT people will email you back immediately. Some other housekeeping issues. On your screen, you should see 5 main sections. At the bottom, the audio section allows you to adjust the volume of this presentation. On the right are the speaker bios, where you'll see our guest presenters today. I'll introduce them in a moment. And top right is related content, where you can find some handouts from our speaker, Dragos. And again, at the bottom is the Ask a Question box. That's where you can send a question that we will answer at the end of today's webcast. But at any time during the webcast, you can enter your question there. You need a better view? You can enlarge a section a couple different ways by clicking on the little box icon in the top right corner of the section, by clicking on the full screen icon at the left of those icons, or by dragging the borders of a section. You can also drag and move the windows around, rearranging your screen pretty much any way that you want. The middle icon, that little hyphen or dash, will close out a section. If you do so accidentally, you can get any window back by clicking one of those icons at the bottom. Each one stands for a different window that you can open or close. And this webinar will be archived. We encourage you to direct coworkers to the recorded presentation on the foodprocessing.com website. Let me introduce our speakers. Miriam Lorbert is Senior Industrial Consultant for Dragos, and Kyle O'Meara is Principal Adversary Hunter. Dragos is a cybersecurity firm that codifies the knowledge of cybersecurity experts into an integrated software platform. It provides customers critical visibility into ICS and OT networks so that threats can be addressed before they become significant events. Now, why even have a cybersecurity webinar? That's actually become a pretty dumb question. As the food and beverage industry slowly embraces higher levels of technology, and even the industrial Internet of Things, companies also open themselves up to hacking from villains across the globe. One of the first widely publicized food industry cyber attacks occurred back in 2017, but 2021 was a particularly busy year for cyber criminals targeting the food and beverage industry. All 4 of these companies faced threats last year. The most famous was JBS USA, which experienced a ransomware attack on Memorial Day weekend of 2021. It shut down beef processing facilities in 6 states, as well as Australia and Canada. Collectively, JBS plants process a quarter of the beef and a fifth of the pork in this country. About 10 days later, it was revealed JBS paid an $11 million ransom to hackers. And that is the most common goal of these threats so far, anyway, ransom. They want money, no doubt, in cryptocurrency. But I'll pose this rhetorical question. What if the hackers didn't want money, but instead wanted to discreetly compromise the safety of the food coming out of those places? What if they wanted machines or systems to harm employees in those plants or in the surrounding area? Once an outsider gets into your computer and even control systems, a lot of scary stuff can happen. So it's against this backdrop, let me hand things over to our first speaker, Kyle O'Meara. Kyle?
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it. Hey, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well today. So we're going to kind of dive into some of sort of the threat scenarios and recommendations around food and beverage operations. Kind of looking at, where we come from on the intelligence team here at Dragos, and really across, because a lot of, on our other side of the house, threat operations side, they also do a lot of hunting as well. But, we're looking exclusively at industrial control systems and landscapes associated with these, and the threat actors associated with them. We have lots of experience across all our teams. I learn from my colleagues across all Dragos all the time. It's a great environment to be in. But given that, we're looking at sort of, the visibility. What can we truly understand about these threat groups as best as we can, their capabilities, what they're doing, their behaviors, their campaigns, and how they're targeting the food and beverage industry itself. And then secondly, we're looking at that detection piece. So once we kind of understand what these threat groups are doing, what tools they're using, how they're doing it, how they're targeting the food and beverage industry, and any ICS related entity, what kind of detections, how can we keep on top of that? How can we see what they're doing? How can we slow down their operations? How can we alert to different things going on in a more efficient way? And then the last sort of piece of that whole puzzle is that response piece. So taking all that culmination of all that information and be able to provide that to our customers, and that OT focused sort of methods, and looking at what they're doing, and putting all that information associated with the vulnerabilities and the threats, and how we're tracking those threats into our platform itself, and how can we effectively slow down slow down the adversary, but speed up our response time. And how do we effectively look at vulnerability management there as well. And inside the Dragos platform, we have like a CVSS information that with practical mitigation advice of now, next, or never. So kind of looking at a broader picture, what are some of the risks to the food and beverage industry, manufacturing side, and as a whole. So kind of you can put these into these are just not your exhaustive threat scenarios. They're just some of the high level ones we could talk about. Obviously ransomware, that's not something I hope that no one's new to here on this webinar. But if not, think of it in the sense of receiving sort of a phishing lure, some type of email itself, with a specific payload that's going to encrypt all your systems. And depending on how your network's all set up, the adversaries will move laterally across these systems and then encrypt all the systems that they can. And then obviously, the flip of that is the extortion piece, right? They're going to ask for so much money back in order to unencrypt your devices themselves. And in some cases, in a lot of cases, that negotiating doesn't happen between the victim and this ransomware actors. And their information is posted to these, what we call these dedicated leak sites that are, located on the dark web. So here they're just kind of, the extortion failed, and now they're just going to expose the victim's information out there for different people to use as it needs. As itself, it's it's not every ransomware victim out there, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Building automation system access. For me, this is one of the bigger aspects of food and beverage, scenarios. And it's not just building automation system access, any kind of third-party access into your OT environment of any sorts. And the ability to then have that window opened up that adversaries can potentially take advantage of. So especially if you're not monitoring and paying attention to what's going on there. Another example then as well is, the social engineering, the espionage aspect. It kind of goes hand in hand with the ransomware in the sense that you kind of receive the same initial infection vector, some type of email, some type of malicious document. Maybe it's downloaded from the internet. Maybe it's actually sent to you in an email. And from there, there's certain payloads inside there that where, the threat actors are just more interested in stealing information from you, and then taking that information and using it, for whatever purposes they might. Maybe it has nothing to do with encryption like ransomware does, but also might just have to be, just taking whatever information they can. Another scenario that can happen is you also have your insider threat, right? So the adversary is not on the outside, the threat group's not on the outside, it's actually located within your organization. This individual might have access to information that they shouldn't have access to. That so that access controls come into place of what they can use and what they can touch and how they can get information. But in this case, a disgruntled former employee is able to gather all the information about your crown jewel assets that Miriam will talk about later on, and gather information about your networks and things like that. And obviously, like in any other scenario, take that with them and do with sell that information to competitors or who may it be itself. So who's doing all this? Who are the threat groups behind all this, right? So at a whole, we have 3 highlighted threat groups that we track here on the slides. 2 of them I like to say that they're impacting food and beverage, and then 1 is actually targeting manufacturing sector itself, right? Kind of, food and beverage falls into that manufacturing sector. So you have Ethereite, which has been known to, in 2021, compromise a bunch of sort of industries, and one of the ones impacted was the food and beverage. They use a lot of SEO poisoning, gather the credentials, and able to deploy their malware in an effective way to beat detections. Camosite is another one. Last year, we saw them in one instance. Food and beverage entity was communicating with known command and control infrastructure associated with this threat actor. So, where that food and beverage entity targeted, it's unsure, but like the fact that it's communicating to that known bad infrastructure is something we track, and we want to make sure that this industry is known that these threat groups are impacting them in ways. And then obviously we have Wastanite. We know they've been targeting manufacturing since late 2019, specifically itself as one of their sectors they go after. And then obviously, underneath here, we have like historical events. Now, all these are sort of your ransomware events that have happened going back to 2017, 2016-ish. So this is not all of the food and beverage manufacturing companies impacted, but this is a good bit of the ones over the last period of time. So you can see many have been associated with different ransomware groups themselves. And some at the latter end, that information was never exposed at what ransom group impacted, Molson Coors, Schreiber Foods, or Nortora. In that sense, it's more of that information was released in, publicly just in the news, or in a lot of cases, there's in the United States, there's filings that need to be done when shareholders are impacted by interruptions, and one of that case was, Molson Coors, released their filings that said they're impacted by a cybersecurity event related to ransomware. So that's kind of how, the threat hunting comes into play, to understanding those avenues when the information is not exposed out there. And then obviously, the fallout of all this, sort of what are the sort of potential impacts to all what's going on in these systems themselves, right? So we have our operational risks, really just the downtime. What's that cost? I've heard statistics over the years that it costs X amount of dollars for every minute that, production plants are down. So, how is that impacted by these threat groups and ransomware groups targeting food and beverage? Loss of intellectual property. So, getting that information stolen, whether it's the recipes, whether it's the packaging design, it's how you do something in your manufacturing facility. Or any kind of errors or issues that can, resolve. Adding a little too much, if adversaries are able to get access to the machine that changes that recipe, that alters, the end product. What does that do itself? Obviously, we have our safety and environmental risk, right? Any kind of injury that could happen caused by a threat group, impacting some type of system in the OT environment. And obviously, we have those, federal and brand management risks as well that come into play. How these events impact your brand? What kind of fines come back from the regulatory agencies, whatever country you're in, when they're impacted by this? And then, what kind of changes happen in these facilities themselves over time? So I think one seed question we're going to throw out here, give everybody a minute to go ahead and answer. We have, what threats do you think is the most prevalent in the food and beverage environments today? We either have ransomware, espionage, you can think of that social engineering as well, building automation systems exposure, but let's also add third-party connections to that, and then insider threats. So take a minute here to go ahead and submit an answer. And I think, Dave, I'm doing this right if I'm correct. It gives everybody time.
Yeah, give them a few seconds.
Getting a few. Give it a little more seconds here. Up to 34%. Okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead and we'll see some of these results here. So it looks like a majority of the group thinks that ransomware is the most prevalent in the food and beverage environment, and I would say we are seeing a lot of that. I'm glad to see that the building automation third-party connections is up there as well. That's my biggest concern when it comes to things, because if they can if they can circumnavigate the IT environment and get right to your OT environment because there's third-party connections, well then, if that's their goal, it makes it a lot easier for them. Oh, it looks like we have one more instance of some challenges also come into play. So we have our impacts. Now we have these challenges. What are some challenges that the food and beverage manufacturer encounter as we go time, and how is that going to impact what these threat groups are going to do? So the increase of automation, any type of new automation inside the OT environment, is going to add some challenges and also some new footprints that adversaries could go after. Obviously, we have our legacy proprietary embedded systems in there. Those might always be there, and how we are going to make sure we have visibility into them. If they're not able to be patched and updated, how can we make sure we're tracking that and that information itself? One big thing here is that lack of segmentation. This is another big thing that's on my list: third-party connection, but then that lack of network segmentation. Even within the OT environment, but also out from the IT to OT environment, not that having that in place. And if that's not something you can do now, what kind of monitoring are you doing to watch what's going on between those two environments? We have the regulatory environment information. So obviously, again, this has to do with, what kind of compliance data, what kind of reporting processes need to be done when certain incidents happen. Obviously, if things can't be patched, what kind of, how are we going to handle that? And what things do need to be patched, how are we going to roll out that patching, those vulnerable systems themselves? And then we have the organizational alignment itself, looking at, how the IT side and the OT side are communicating, for cybersecurity strategies, because something that's important to the IT side might not be important to OT side, or might something vice versa, might be, very important to the OT side. A digital transformation as well. How that's going to impact your OT side of the house. And then obviously the skill gaps, the workforce shortages. Skill gaps is that, the floor engineers were never, maybe had any idea they're going to be dealing with cybersecurity back in the day. Well, now that's coming to, be a concern and something to be, watchful over. And I will now kick this over to Miriam.
Actually, Kyle, before you go, let me ask a question. Give us a for employees within food and beverage companies. How can they make sure they aren't unknowingly introducing malware into their environment?
I think there's different training that can go on to train employees to how to deal with certain, using, safe access to the internet, and safe, how to deal with your, emails and things you might get and attachments you might get from there. Obviously, I think some monitoring of all sorts helps. That, when those instances do come into play, what kind of monitoring do you have set up? Obviously, the education again is the big thing. So not just understanding how to handle the malicious documents, but also like how to report things to your IT staff. How is that handled from down there? How's that information communicated? There's lots of different things to do. I think, the biggest thing is to have something, to prioritize cybersecurity somewhere in, your forecasting future, whether it's, talking and getting threat intel information, just so you're aware of it. If it's getting, platform devices to monitor this stuff, if it's just buying services that can help do network assessments and pen tests, or if it's buying the platform itself to then monitor and stuff. So I think putting that forecasting and thinking about that is important, on any roadmap for a food and beverage, manufacturer operations.
And with that, I think we go to Miriam, huh?
Awesome, thank you. Thank you, Kyle. That was really great. I will continue the conversation talking about steps moving forward to increasing your overall OT cybersecurity journey. So as as many of us on the call probably know and understand, that the key to doing anything successfully within an organization is having good relationships between key groups and stakeholders. That's the only way that anything is going to get done. So our recommendations for a successful OT cybersecurity journey start with building a strong foundation with your executive team and key stakeholders and gaining alignment on what needs to be done and a path moving forward. Prioritizing what those actions look like and what needs to be accomplished in order to carry out that plan. And then collaborating between your IT and your OT groups, making sure, you know, those are the two groups that are really going to be carrying out everything that you need to make sure that you have a defensible architecture. So making sure the relationship between those two groups are strong and that everyone is aligned on the path forward. Recently, Dragos published our 5 critical controls, which are the 5 main categories where we would recommend putting in mitigating controls for effective OT cybersecurity. Those include an ICS-specific incident response plan, a defensible architecture, OT visibility, a vulnerability management program, and multi-factor authentication. So let's review them each one by one and talk about what the necessary actions entail. So an ICS-specific incident response plan. Many companies probably already have an incident response plan, but it may not include operational technology or industrial control system specific attributes. And it's important that they do have those things because, as we can see on the slide, your OT infrastructure is going to be a little bit different than your IT infrastructure. So there are different devices and assets, different communication protocols, different tactics, techniques, and procedures. So it's really important to create that dedicated plan so that if or should you encounter such an incident that you need to respond to, you also know how to do it within your operational technology side. And then also to think about managing the potential impact of an incident is going to be different depending on what vertical you're in. So thinking about the impact for a food and beverage company is going to be different than oil and gas or energy companies. So it's important to use those aspects to help prioritize and outline your ICS-specific incident response plan. Number 2 is a defensible architecture. So this is what can help you harden your environment such that it can detract or completely prevent an adversary from gaining access. Some efforts include removing extraneous OT network access points. If you don't need it, get rid of it. Maintaining strong policy controls at IT-OT interface points. So really zoning in on that boundary between your IT assets and your OT assets, locking down any communication that is necessary or extraneous, and adding in as many layers as possible to keep making that boundary stronger. Mitigating high-risk vulnerabilities. If you are or subscribe to any information sharing or intelligence sharing in which you would get notified about such vulnerabilities, see how that fits in with your overall prioritization of actions that you'll be carrying out for your cybersecurity plan. And if it ranks high, then you should prioritize mitigating those vulnerabilities. As well as the people and processes to maintain it. So having and creating a program, as well as training your people and making sure that they have the necessary resources to carry it through and maintain and update it as needed. Okay, we have a poll. How mature is your company in its OT cybersecurity journey? So we will give a couple seconds or a minute for a response and see how we do. All right, we're getting some answers rolling in. Okay, we'll just give it another couple seconds. Awesome. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look. So we have 52% are just starting to develop OT-specific cyber programs. That's awesome. We have OT-specific cyber plan, but it's not fully optionalized, 20%. And our OT cyber plan is operationalized in all areas of the business are ready and knowledgeable, 28%. Those are really good stats. And it kind of just shows that developing, regardless of how mature you are, the fact that OT-specific cyber programs and plans are at the forefront is the best case scenario. So everyone's on a really good path. Okay, continuing in on those 5 critical controls. Number 3 is OT visibility. So you don't know what you don't know, or you don't know what you can't see, or you can't protect what you can't see. So in our year-end review for 2021, it was found that 86% of Dragos Services customers had limited to no visibility in their OT environment. And that, I mean, that's pretty scary. Not knowing the landscape of what you have on your industrial control system side. So if there are rogue devices or rogue communication happening, most people would be unaware that it is happening. So part of OT visibility includes maintaining an inventory of assets, so knowing what you have, mapping vulnerabilities against those assets. So you have a list of known devices, operating systems, firmware, compiling all that data, and then based on information or intelligence that you subscribe to or seek out, how does the published vulnerabilities apply to your assets and what you have? Next, actively monitors traffic for potential threats. So that would include having some sort of system similar to the Dragos platform or else, and monitoring traffic for anything unusual or abnormal. And then finally, this point is so important. Your operational technology visibility is going to validate the controls that you've implemented in your environment. So it'll tell you whether the controls that you have in there already are working or not. So if you do see suspicious traffic, why are you seeing suspicious traffic? Where are you seeing? What can you do about it? Do you need to lock down your firewall rules? Do you need a better jump host access or VPN access or whatever it is? Or if you're not seeing suspicious activity, then your controls are doing exactly what they should be doing, which is best case scenario, right? Okay. Multi-factor authentication is an interesting one because this one can be appropriately applied from the IT realm to the OT realm. And it doesn't necessarily apply in all cases, right? So you have to make sure that your operational technology, whether it's a specific device or system or system architecture as a whole, can support multi-factor authentication. But where it can be supported, it should be used if applied appropriately. So adding that extra layer of authentication for access could be a relatively small investment for a company, but it would translate into adding in those extra layers wherever you can to deter or prevent access. And finally, a vulnerability management program. So we talked a little bit about this part of OT visibility. So first, knowing your assets, then knowing your vulnerabilities and which assets they may or may not apply to. And now we take it a step further, where we prioritize those vulnerabilities. How do they fit into our plan? How do they fit into our business plan for how feasible it might be to mitigate those vulnerabilities and carry out any actions that we need to carry out to either mitigate or completely remove the vulnerability? So that tends toward building a vulnerability management program, which will map out all of those rules for you based on your company's priorities. Dragos offers a wide range of multifaceted ICS cybersecurity support tools. So, all the way from our platform and sensor, which is physically installed in your environment, or a wide range of intelligence subscription, vulnerability analysis services, etc. And that can apply or hopefully help any type of ICS company, no matter the size. And just a quick reminder for anyone who may or may not know, if you're looking for more information about OT cybersecurity and you are an asset owner in your organization, Dragos is having our annual Industrial Security Conference in early November. All right.
Okay, Miriam, before you go, I have a question for you. How quickly do companies usually know they've been hit with a cyber attack? What are the first signs?
So I don't mean this to be funny, but it's going to come out funny when I say that it's usually too late. So when do companies find out? Usually too late. So just tracking back to 86% of companies did not have visibility into their OT assets. That is something that could help potentially make you aware sooner of any malicious activity. And it could be any number of things, right? It could be suspicious traffic at weird hours. It could be, bulk data dumps getting exfiltrated from your system. It could be logins, multiple login attempts that may or may not trigger multi-factor authentication notifications. So suspicious activity can present itself in many ways. The first step is understanding what your company's normal behavior is, and then you can determine what is abnormal, and that can help you try to figure out much sooner if you are becoming the victim of a cyber attack.
Okay, thank you, Miriam. And Kyle, too. I think we have time for a few questions, and some of you apparently have already discovered that. Ask the question box. at the bottom of your screen, but you may still type a question in there. And we'll attempt to answer it in the time we have left. Now, here's one that has already come through. We get a lot of notifications about vulnerabilities. How can we tell what's important to patch and what should be ignored or deferred?
Sure, I can take that one. So that kind of lends back to some of the critical controls that we talked about. So, hopefully there's a way that a company ingests vulnerability information or any notifications that go out from cyber organizations or third-party organizations. And a company should be able to map that against their asset inventory and see even, off the bat first, does it even apply to me? And if it does, then it touches upon that key vulnerability management plan of how does that fit into your list of priorities within your cyber program, and how can you help mitigate it in that regard?
Kyle, anything to add?
I think Miriam hit it on its head right there.
Yeah, I think that would do it.
Thank you.
This might be one. Here's one that I think is for you, Kyle. Do you have any additional metrics that you can share? This is from Eric, on any of these companies that were successfully attacked, as far as revenue loss, brand reputation, manufacturing downtime? I think I said the JBS attack. Kyle, is that the right number? They paid a ransom of $11 million.
You know what? Don't quote me on that. I don't recall the exact amount. I believe that they did pay ransom. That's a lot to remember in my head. Unfortunately, I cannot recall exactly. A lot of them do in some cases. A lot of them don't. And a lot of times it doesn't become public. As far as sort of metrics are concerned, none off the top of my head exactly, but we're compiling our year in review now that'll come out early next year. So I don't mean to kick it to another product, but we have a whole year in report out there, a whole year in webinar, and it does cover incident response and companies impacted by different threat groups themselves and statistics related to that. That's all covered in the year in review. So that came out around March, I think, of this year. So there's a whole document on the website as well as a pre-recorded webinar as well.
And a related question from Deborah. How common are cyber attacks on food and beverage manufacturers? Besides the 4 that I had on my slide and from 2021.
Yeah, how common? I mean, there's a lot of, I think there was a Chicago Tribune report that came out late last year that talked about the, preceding JBS attack, there was 40 additional attack on food producers. I mean, I know we've seen a consistent food and beverage companies impacted by ransomware. So, again, there was a lot in the slide deck today. It was more of some high level ones. But there's a lot of other smaller players in the game that are impacted as well. That in supply chains and things like that. So I would say it's on a rise. Is it more targeted or more ad hoc? It's hard to say, and I don't think it matters at the end of the day as far as if it's happening or not. So we do see a lot increase than I've seen in the past for food and beverage companies impacted by ransomware, as well as other attacks from different threat groups. The fact that some have been impacted by threat groups we track is key to keep in mind. That I think there's not a specific victim that's off limits.
So another related question from Patricia. When you talk about incident response, can you quantify the cost of that?
I can take that one. Incident response is so interesting because that also depends on how the company thinks about incident response. So is it the immediate incident response efforts to get you back to normal or somewhat normal operating conditions? Is it the immediate incident response plus maybe some longer term efforts that are part that are going to be integrated into the overall response? Is it the immediate response plus longer term effects to other projects or efforts that might have been affected? Or is it like totally zoomed out and we're talking about everything and it's this overall incident response effort? So it kind of depends how your company wants to view incident response as far as cost. And that lends itself to defining those metrics for your own cybersecurity program and maybe a cyber risk management program. Also, it's important if you have your incident response plan defined and tested and reviewed and updated as needed before an incident should occur, then your responsiveness and your response activities tend to be a lot quicker because, you know, in an incident situation, everything's chaos, you know, and so it helps to have that dedicated plan or program to ground you and really put you through the steps of everything that you need to do to get back to a normal operating state as soon as possible. And we do have incident response retainers for this purpose. So Dragos can be hired, you know, in the event that an incident occurs. So we have incident responders that can come help you in your organization in that time of need as well.
Another question. What's the best approach for successful OT cybersecurity implementation in food and beverages vertical, knowing that the environment is a bit complex?
So that's an interesting one. I think all verticals in operational technology have their own measure of complexity. And you know, similarly food and beverage. But I think when it comes to introducing a successful cybersecurity program, it needs to come from the top down. So you will have to get alignment with your executive team members and your key stakeholders in the organization and help them understand why it's needed and where the benefit is, and then they can help push all of the OT cybersecurity efforts across the line. I think it should be a top-down approach. Kyle, do you have any thoughts on that? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I double muted for some reason. Yeah, I think you said it has to be a top-down approach. I think, you know, as we both mentioned throughout, like just getting it in the roadmap, you know, is better than not trying to include it because it might cost too much. So I think at least forward thinking that, okay, maybe Q2 of 2023, we'll think about threat, you know, feeds that we might be useful to us to use in our organizations and sort of build out there. And then obviously, you know, scoping the type of people itself, right? So top-down approach, but I think it can really start from anywhere, you know, a manager in the environment knowing that this exists and knowing that this, you know, concerns are out there, that it's important to at least try to tackle it, get in front of it.
Yeah, and I think everyone's, you know, on the right track already, just based on what we saw from that second poll, coming up with ICS-specific plans and programs. It's on everyone's radar. So I think the attendees are definitely on the right path.
They do appear to be on the right path.
Yeah.
But that's all the time we have today, although the questions are still coming in. We will be sending you an email shortly with instructions on how to download the slides from today's webinar. We'll also let you know when this webinar is available for on-demand viewing, probably within 24 hours. And by the way, even if your coworkers watch this webinar on demand, if you type a question into the Q&A box, we will get it, and we'll forward it to Miriam or Kyle for on-demand answering. In the next screen will be an exit survey that we hope you will take. But that will do it for us. This webinar is over, and thank you all for tuning in today.
Thank you.
Thank you as well.